When we think of the medieval period, we often imagine a time of total ignorance, yet their lives were governed by a very specific, logical fear. To a person living in the 14th century, the idea of submerging the body in hot water was not a luxury, but a dangerous gamble with fate. The catastrophic arrival of the Black Death in 1348 changed the European psyche forever. Medical experts at the time believed that heat and water opened the pores of the skin, creating a direct gateway for lethal miasma to enter the vital organs. Miasma was the invisible, foul-smelling air thought to carry disease, and to open your body to it was seen as an act of slow suicide. Therefore, the thick layer of grime and sweat that accumulated over weeks and months was viewed as a protective shield, a secondary skin that kept the invisible killers at bay. The daily ritual of hygiene was, consequently, a minimal and cautious affair. A person might wake up and use a small basin of cold water to quickly wipe the crust from their eyes and the visible dirt from their hands. This was not about cleanliness in a biological sense, but about maintaining a public face of social readiness. The rest of the body remained untouched by water for months, or even years, as the natural oils of the skin mingled with the dust of the streets. This created a physical barrier that we would find intolerable today, but to them, it was the only defense they had against a world of unseen pathogens. The skin was a fortress, and every bath was a breach in the walls that could lead to a fevered death. In this world where water was a threat, the concept of cleanliness was transferred from the body to the clothing. For the wealthy elite, the ultimate symbol of health and status was not a clean scent, but the sight of crisp, white linen. Linen was believed to have a unique medical property, acting as a sponge that could draw out the impurities of the skin from the inside out. By wearing a fine white undershirt and changing it frequently, a nobleman could claim to be clean without ever having to risk a bath. The whiteness of the fabric served as visual proof that the toxins of the body had been successfully absorbed and removed. This created a massive economic demand for flax and linen production, turning the textile industry into a pillar of the medieval economy. The display of linen was a calculated social performance, a way to signal that one had the resources to outsource their hygiene to laundry maids. While the poor wore rough wool that trapped odors and parasites, the rich draped themselves in layers of bleached cloth that required constant attention. To have a gleaming white collar or cuff peeking out from under a heavy silk robe was to say that you were purified, both medically and morally. This obsession with fabric over flesh meant that the laundry rooms of great estates were the true front lines of medieval health. The process of washing these linens was an arduous task involving lye made from wood ash and human urine, which acted as a powerful bleaching agent.
Finest cheese in the county, right here. Get your cheese. Too low for the pot, no less. Watch where you're going with that cart. Finest wool in all of
Moving from the body to the face, we encounter a reality of dental care that was both primitive and terrifying. In the Middle Ages, a beautiful smile was a rare gift, and most people lived in a state of chronic, low-level dental pain. The primary cause of tooth decay was misunderstood, with many believing that tiny, invisible toothworms bored holes into the enamel. To combat these imaginary parasites, people used harsh abrasives to scrub their teeth, often using mixtures of crushed bone, sea salt, and bitter herbs. While these could remove some surface stains, they often did more harm than good, grinding away the protective enamel and leaving the teeth vulnerable to infection.
Hear, hear, Lord Edmund.
When a tooth finally succumbed to decay and the pain became unbearable, there was only one recourse: the barber-surgeon. These men were the jacks of all trades of the medieval medical world, cutting hair, performing bloodletting, and pulling teeth with equal vigor. There was no anesthesia, no sterile environment, and no delicate instruments. A tooth extraction was a violent, public event, often performed in a market square with the patient held down by strong assistants. The resulting gaps in the mouth were seen as inevitable marks of aguing, and many people learned to speak and smile with a cautious, closed-mouth restraint to hide the ruins of their dental health.
I did not sign up for this. Look at this mess.
Because bathing was rare and dental health was poor, the air surrounding a medieval person was a complex tapestry of odors. Society did not aim for the absence of smell, but rather for the victory of one scent over another in a constant state of scent warfare. Heavy, cloying perfumes were the primary weapons in this struggle, with musk, rose water, and exotic spices being imported at great expense. These scents were not meant to suggest freshness, but to overwhelm the natural odors of decay, sweat, and unwashed bodies. A person of high status was expected to be a walking cloud of expensive fragrances, creating a sensory bubble that separated them from the common folk. This reliance on perfume extended beyond the body and into the very architecture of the home. Dried herbs like lavender and meadowsweet were strewn across the floors of great halls, so that every step would release a fresh burst of scent to mask the smell of old rushes and food scraps. In the absence of modern sanitation, the nose was the primary judge of an environment's safety. If a room smelled of sweet flowers, it was deemed healthy. If it smelled of rot, it was a place of death. This created a culture of artifice, where the appearance and scent of purity were far more important than the physical removal of dirt. When we look at the engineering of the time, even the grandest castles reveal a shocking lack of what we would call privacy or hygiene. The toilets, known as guardrobes, were essentially small stone closets with a hole that opened directly over a moat or a massive cesspit. Gravity was the only flushing mechanism, and the result was a constant, underlying stench that permeated the lower levels of the fortress. However, the medieval mind was incredibly resourceful, and they found a way to turn this waste into a functional tool. The ammonia fumes rising from the pits were discovered to be a powerful insecticide, and so expensive woolen garments were often hung in the guardrobe shafts to kill moths and fleas. The management of waste in these stone giants was a constant logistical nightmare. The cesspits at the base of the shafts had to be cleaned out periodically, a task so foul that it was relegated to the lowest rungs of the labor force. The wealth and power of a lord were built on a foundation of literal filth, and the grand tapestries and stone walls could never quite mask the reality of the human biology hidden within. This creates a striking contrast between the romanticized image of the knight in shining armor and the lived reality of a man who lived in a building that functioned as a giant vertical sewer.
The herbs brewed as a tea.
Thank you, Master Godwin.
If the castles were difficult to manage, the cities were true epicenters of biological chaos. As the population of London grew toward the year 1400, the lack of a formal sewage system became a crisis of survival. Waste was often dumped into open gutters in the middle of the streets, intended to be washed away by the next rainstorm into the river. When the rains didn't come, the streets became impassable rivers of black muck. To manage this, the city relied on a specialized class of workers known as gong farmers. These men were only allowed to work at night, descending into the deep, lightless pits of the city to shovel out human waste by hand.
A truly magnificent display, wouldn't you agree, my lady?
The life of a gong farmer was one of extreme danger and social isolation. They were paid well for their labor, but they were forced to live in restricted areas of the city and could only move about under the cover of darkness. The fumes in the cesspits were often lethal, and it was not uncommon for a worker to collapse and suffocate in the very waste he was hired to remove. Despite the horror of the job, the gong farmers were the only thing standing between the city and a total collapse into pestilence. They were the invisible guardians of urban life, performing the most reviled task imaginable to keep the machinery of the economy grinding forward.
Fire feels warm.
It does.
Long day. That old tractor nearly quit on me.
In the midst of this urban struggle, animals played a dual role as both a cause of filth and a crude sanitation system. Pigs were a common sight in the streets of medieval towns, roaming freely and acting as living garbage disposals. They would roam through the gutters, consuming food scraps and organic waste that would otherwise rot in the sun. While this helped reduce the volume of refuse, it added a new layer of animal waste to the mix. The city was a chaotic ecosystem of humans, livestock, and vermin, all competing for space in narrow, timber-framed streets that were never designed for such density. The presence of these animals was a constant source of legal and social tension. City records from the middle of the 14th century are filled with complaints about rogue pigs attacking children or blocking the paths of merchants. Yet, the economic reality was that most families relied on these animals for survival, and the services they provided as street cleaners were too valuable to lose. The city was not just a place of humans, but a multi-species hive where the boundaries between the barnyard and the bedroom were often non-existent. To the natural odors of life and waste, we must add the sharp, chemical aggression of medieval industry. The city was a place of production, and many of the most important trades were also the most pungent. Tanneries, which produced the leather essential for everything from shoes to armor, were notorious for their use of fermented urine and dog feces to cure hides. These facilities were usually clustered along the riverbanks, pouring their toxic runoff into the same water that people used for laundry and brewing. The air around a tannery was so acrid that it could be felt on the skin, a biting reminder of the physical cost of commerce. This environmental degradation was accepted as a necessary trade-off for economic growth. The leather trade, the wool industry, and the slaughterhouses were the engines of the medieval world, and their smells were the smells of prosperity. A person walking through a city gate would be hit by a sensory assault that we can barely imagine today. It was a mixture of wood smoke, rotting hay, industrial chemicals, and the ever-present scent of unwashed humanity. To live in the city was to be constantly immersed in this olfactory soup, a shared experience that bonded the population together in a way that modern, sterilized life does not. When we consider the most intimate aspects of life, the lack of modern convenience is perhaps most apparent in the absence of toilet paper. Personal sanitation after defecation was a matter of improvisation and local availability. While the very wealthy might afford fragments of old linen or soft wool, the vast majority of the population relied on the natural world. Moss, leaves, hay, and straw were the standard materials of the day. These were often rough, irritating, and far from effective at truly cleaning the skin. This constant irritation, combined with the lack of frequent washing, meant that skin ailments and infections were a chronic part of daily life. The psychological impact of this lack of hygiene is difficult to measure, but it must have fostered a sense of physical grit and endurance. There was no escaping the reality of the body's functions. From the highest king to the lowest peasant, everyone dealt with the same basic, uncomfortable realities. This shared biological struggle created a society that was far less squeamish than our own. They were intimately familiar with the textures and smells of the natural world, and their lives were lived in a much closer relationship with the earth and its cycles of decay and renewal.
Come on down, beautiful fabrics right here.
Bless this well, O Lord.
This environment of poor sanitation created a perfect breeding ground for a silent, internal invasion. Intestinal parasites, such as roundworms and tapeworms, were nearly universal in the medieval population. Studies of skeletal remains and ancient cesspits show that almost everyone, regardless of social class, carried a heavy load of these organisms. These parasites were a constant drain on the body's resources, stealing nutrition and leaving people in a state of chronic fatigue and vulnerability. It was an invisible tax on survival, a biological burden that every person carried from childhood to the grave.
Only this much.
Centuries of discovery, from sanitation to vaccines.
Despite this relentless biological assault, the medieval people were not weak. Their immune systems were forged in a fire of constant exposure, creating a resilience that is hard for us to comprehend. They fought back with the tools they had: herbal tinctures, vinegar washes, and the antiseptic power of alcohol. Their hygiene was not a result of laziness, but a calculated response to the technological and scientific limits of their age. They lived in a world where every breath and every touch was a potential threat, and they navigated it with a courage that we often fail to recognize in our historical narratives. In the final analysis, the story of medieval hygiene is not a story of filth, but a story of human dignity in the face of impossible odds. It reveals a world where cleanliness was a luxury, earned through backbreaking labor and guarded with superstitious intensity. To be clean was to have power, to have health, and to have a future. As we look back from our world of running water and antibacterial soaps, we should see not a primitive people, but a resilient one. They endured conditions that would break a modern person, and they did so while building the foundations of the world we inhabit today.
Consistent with the Lenten fast diet.
Look at the detail on that sword hilt.
As you move through your day, perhaps you will look at the world around you with a slightly different eye. Consider the invisible systems that keep our streets clean and our bodies healthy, and remember the gong farmers and the linen washers who paved the way. Are we truly cleaner than they were, or have we just become better at hiding our waste? I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think you would have fared in the year 1300? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the shadows of the past. I wish you all good health and the wisdom to appreciate the comforts of the modern world. Thank you for watching.